G'day, Scott here from ScottsHobbyz. This video I'm going to show you how I flatten a dished oil stone. As you can see, it isn't very flat, especially on the coarse side. This is a 9 by 3 inch silicon carbide stone I got at a garage sale for $2. Just needs a bit of work to get it back in order. To start the process, I use a large paver with plenty of water and sand. The sand I'm using here is just bricky sand, which isn't really optimal. It's a bit fine and has clay in it. The ideal would be something a little coarser with less clay, but I didn't have anything like that at the time. It's also important to have the grains of sand be a fairly consistent size. You can use other things like silicon carbide grit, but sand is extremely cheap by comparison. You just have to use a lot more of it as it breaks down fairly quick and isn't as hard as conventional abrasives. Packing sand, which is the type you use for under pavers and stuff, works well as it is coarser, but you have to have a way to sieve out the larger particles as they're usually too rough on your stone. The larger particles can gouge into softer stones, and they tend to leave heavy pitting in harder stones like the one I'm doing here. You can also see I'm often turning the stone around and swapping between rubbing it straight and with a figure of 8 pattern. This is to help the stone sort of have the same thickness over the whole surface. If you just do it one way, you tend to place more pressure on one end or one side of the stone than the other, and even though the surface will be flat, it'll be angled one way or another. I actually switched to something much coarser to hurry the process along, which left some of that pitting I was talking about in the surface, but then I went back to the finer sand and cleaned that up. And then the cat was like, "Oh, what's going on up here?" and decided to come check it all out. Once you've removed the dish from your stone, you're probably about as good as you're going to get off of the paver. For most people, they'll be happy with this, but I like to take it a bit further, as I often sharpen blades with wide bevels which need a flatter surface to be optimal. From here, I lay a piece of wet and dry sandpaper on some glass, and again use plenty of water. This helps it stick to the glass so it doesn't move around on you as much, as well as stops it clogging so quickly. You tend to use 1 to 2 sheets of sandpaper on this step as it breaks down pretty fast. The wet and dry I'm using here is a tad small for such a big stone, but it's still got the job done. I was also using a 120 grit as I ran out of the coarser stuff. For these kinds of stones, I'd recommend a 60 to 80 grit sheet. Possibly a 40 grit worn belt would work too. Find if you sand it with something too fine, it doesn't cut the stone down to fresh abrasive as well, and it tends to smooth out the surface so it doesn't cut as well either. You can use sandpaper for the whole process, but as oil stones are generally a lot harder than water stones, you would use so much that it isn't really worth the money, which is why I use the sand. You can also do it without sand, just on the paver. It just takes a fair bit longer. It took me just under an hour to get this stone back into shape. If you don't let your stone get to this point, you won't have to do this whole big process. It's mainly for neglected stones you find or buy from people who don't know how to maintain them. I'll do a video on basic maintenance for these soon. It's very easy if you don't know how to do it, and if you don't let them get to this point. As you can see, now it's all nice and flat on both sides and with no light coming from under the ruler. Last but not least, just at the end, so that whoever owned this before me obviously banged it into things and took chips and stuff out of it, so just to help avoid that happening again, with your sandpaper at the end, just give it a couple goes like that, just to chamfer it a little bit. Alright, it's good and ready to go again now, so yeah,
Pretty happy with that, and I might do a video sharpening with it in the future just to show you how it goes. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and have a good one.